Have you ever watched someone spend money you gave them and still look you in the eye like you owe them more? Not spend it carelessly. Spend it deliberately. Like your name was never attached to any of it. That's how I found out I wasn't considered a partner in the bakery I funded. Not from a conversation, from a ribbon. A yellow ribbon and a photograph. My daughter-in-law was holding one end. My son was holding the other. Scissors in her hand, mid-cut, both of them grinning at the camera like they'd built something out of nothing. The caption read, "Grand Opening Weekend. We did it." 3 weeks after I'd transferred the last installment of $280,000 into their business account. I was standing in my kitchen in Memphis when I saw it, still in my robe, coffee going cold on the counter. My friend Louisa had sent it to me with a simple text. "Looks like it went well. Were you there?" I wasn't there. My name is Elaine Whitfield. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a hospital administrator, and before that I spent 11 years working nights and weekends to finish a degree I started after my husband passed. I did not inherit money. I built it, slowly, carefully, the way you build anything when you understand what it costs to lose it. And when my son came to me with his wife's dream of opening a Southern food restaurant in Nashville, I didn't give them money because I was sentimental. I gave it because I believed in the structure we agreed to put around it. The word structure matters, remember it. Because everything that happened after came down to whether or not that word was respected. My son, I'll call him by what he is to me, my son, came to my house on a Sunday in early spring. He sat at my dining room table the way he used to sit when he needed to ask for something big, hands folded, posture good, eyes that flickered between confidence and nerves. His wife sat beside him. She is the kind of woman who takes up space with her presence before she says a word. Hair always done. Clothes always intentional. Smile that arrives just before her opinion does. She had a concept. She had a name, a logo, a mood board, a lease she was already negotiating on a space in East Nashville. What she didn't have was the capital to make any of it real. My son did most of the talking at first. He talked about the opportunity, the neighborhood, the foot traffic, the demographics. He talked about her talent the way a man talks about his wife when he's trying to make sure the room falls in love with her before the ask lands. She nodded at strategic moments. She chimed in when the numbers came up because she knew I respected numbers. They wanted $250,000, enough to cover build-out, equipment, initial inventory, staffing for the first 3 months, and working capital while the business found its footing. I asked questions, not soft ones. I asked about their projected revenue in month 6 if they were only running at 60% capacity. I asked who would be responsible for vendor relationships. I asked whether they had a bookkeeper or if they were planning to manage the accounts themselves. My daughter-in-law's smile tightened at that last question. Just slightly. The way someone smiles when they feel like a teacher is questioning them in front of the class. My son answered most of those questions. She answered the ones that involved her vision, her menu, her brand. I listened to all of it, and then I told them I would think about it. What I actually did was call my accountant and my attorney the next morning. I want to be honest about something. I love the idea. I loved that my son had married a woman with ambition. I loved the thought of a restaurant with her name on the awning and her grandmother's recipes on the menu. I am a woman who has wanted things and worked for them, and I recognized that hunger in her. But hunger without accountability is how dreams become disasters and other people's money disappears into them. My attorney is a woman I have worked with for over a decade. She is patient, thorough, and she does not tell me what I want to hear. She told me that family investments in small businesses have a high failure rate not because the businesses fail, but because the agreements fail. People shake hands across kitchen tables and call it done. She told me that if I was serious about protecting my investment and my relationship with my son, I needed paper, real paper, not a promissory note typed on a personal laptop. A formal loan agreement with repayment terms, an operating agreement that specified my role, a personal guarantee, and a clear understanding of what would happen if the business didn't meet the milestones we set. I went back to my son and his wife with a counterproposal, not a rejection, a structure. The meeting was at my attorney's office. I remember my daughter-in-law walked in looking like she expected a celebration and found a deposition instead. She sat across from me with her hands on the table and her expression polished into something patient. But underneath it I could feel the resistance. She had not anticipated that my yes would come with a framework. My son read every page. I watched his eyes move across each paragraph carefully, the way I taught him to read anything before signing it. His wife scanned. There's a difference between reading and scanning, and I noticed it. The agreement outlined a loan of $280,000, not $250, because by the time we finished the proper planning, the actual need was higher, and I wanted it fully capitalized from the start rather than underfunded and desperate 2 months in. The loan carried a modest interest rate below market, because he was my son, and I am not a bank. Repayment began 18 months after opening, giving them time to find their footing. Monthly financial reports to me in writing, starting in month 3. Milestone checkpoints at 6 months and 12 months. And one clause my daughter-in-law read twice and then looked up at me with a question in her eyes before she smoothed her expression back to neutral. The clause said that if reporting requirements were not met, or if the business made major financial decisions without a documented approval process, I had the right to call a formal review. She asked what that meant in practice. My attorney explained it clearly. It meant I was not a silent wallet. I was a structured lender with defined rights. Rights that existed on paper, not just an expectation. My daughter-in-law nodded and said she thought it was fair. The way she said it told me she thought it was temporary. Like it was a hoop to jump through to get to the money, and once the money arrived, the hoop would disappear. They both signed. My son signed with a steadiness that made me proud. His wife signed with the flourish of a woman who had already moved on to the opening in her mind. I wrote the first check that afternoon. What happened in the months that followed felt gradual when I was inside it. Looking back, it was systematic. The first few weeks, my son called regularly. He sent photos of the build-out. He texted me videos of the kitchen equipment being installed, the floors being laid, the sign going up above the door. He was excited in a way I hadn't seen from him in years. The kind of excitement that comes when a man feels like he's finally building something that belongs to him. I fed that excitement. I asked questions. I showed up twice to walk through the space during construction. Both times, my daughter-in-law greeted me with the warmth of a woman entertaining a guest rather than a woman hosting someone with an ownership stake in the building she was standing in. The calls from my son got shorter around month 2. Not absent, just thinner. More updates, less conversation. He started using we in a way that felt like a wall. We're handling it. We've got a system. We're figuring it out. Every sentence had 2 people in it, and neither of them was me. The monthly reports were late the first month. 30 days in, nothing. I sent a text to my son. He sent back a photo of receipts and a note that said the bookkeeper was getting everything organized. I gave it another week. Still nothing formal. I called him. He said they were slammed with pre-opening prep, and his wife would get the report together soon. I reminded him gently that the agreement started at month 3 and we were already at month 2, and I wanted to establish the habit early. His wife sent me a spreadsheet 4 days later. It was not what we agreed to. It was a list of categories with approximate numbers, formatted like something she'd put together in 20 minutes on a Sunday night. I replied and thanked her for sending it. I also said I'd share the reporting template my accountant had prepared so the format would be consistent going forward. She never acknowledged that email. I told myself it was the stress of opening. I told myself that people in the middle of launching something are not at their best with paperwork. I have launched things. I know how overwhelming it gets. So I gave space. I gave grace. I kept writing the support checks on the schedule we'd agreed to. The grand opening happened on a Saturday in October. I did not know it was that Saturday until I saw the photograph Louisa sent me. I want to sit in that for a moment because it's important to understand what the sequence actually was. I didn't find out I wasn't invited and then get upset about the exclusion. I found out by seeing a public post, not a private photo someone sent me to share the moment. A public Instagram post with a geotag, a ribbon, a crowd visible in the background, and a caption that used the word we 11 times. I counted. I called my son. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me. His voice was loose, celebratory, slightly breathless. "Mom, hey, we're actually in the middle of wrapping up. I kept my voice even. I told him I'd seen the post. I asked when the opening was. A pause, not long. The kind of pause that happens when someone realizes a conversation they were hoping to avoid has arrived anyway. Today, he said, and then, I know, I should have. His wife's voice came into the background, clear enough to hear, low enough that I don't think she knew I could. Tell her we'll do a family dinner next week. My son repeated it back to me like it was his own idea. We'll do something with the family next week, Mom. Make it special. Family. The word sat in my chest wrong. I was the family. I was the one who had made the whole week possible. Every week since the beginning. I said okay. I said I looked forward to it. And then I ended the call and stood in my kitchen in the quiet that follows when you realize something has been decided about you without your knowledge. The family dinner never happened. Not that week, not the week after. There were always reasons. The restaurant was finding its rhythm. They were short-staffed, something with the supplier. My son texted instead of calling. My daughter-in-law's texts when she sent them were brief and logistical. Had I received the latest report? Was I available for a quick call Thursday? Nothing that sounded like a daughter-in-law. Everything that sounded like someone managing a stakeholder they wished wasn't there. I kept paying attention. That has always been my skill, not volume. Attention. Around month 4, I noticed the financial reports had stopped mentioning a category we had specifically discussed: catering revenue. My daughter-in-law had mentioned at our first meeting that catering would be a significant secondary income stream. She had connections, corporate clients she'd already been in conversation with. It was one of the details that made me feel confident about the business model. The reports now showed dining revenue, merchandise, and a line called miscellaneous income that had no breakdown. I asked about it twice in writing. Both times I received vague answers about timing and how they were still organizing the catering side of the business. I asked my accountant to take a look at the numbers I had been given. She came back to me with something I hadn't expected. Based on what they were reporting, the business was performing better than the projections we had used to build the loan. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. And yet the reports were thin, late, and the format kept changing. That combination, she said, meant one of two things. Either they didn't know how to report properly, or they were choosing not to. I asked her which one she thought it was. She said, based on the catering line being absent, she thought someone had decided that certain revenue didn't need to be shared with me. I didn't call my son when I heard that. I called my attorney. The conversation with my attorney was methodical, the way important conversations need to be when feelings are involved, but decisions have to be precise. She pulled up the agreement and we went through it together. The reporting clause was clear. Monthly financials in the format provided within 10 business days of month end. They had missed that standard in 3 of the 4 months since opening. The miscellaneous income line without a breakdown was a direct violation of the transparency requirement. And there was one more thing she flagged that I had not noticed myself. A social media post my daughter-in-law had made 6 weeks earlier, announcing a partnership with a corporate event planning company for exclusive catering services. It was tagged with a business account. It had over 400 likes. It mentioned the restaurant by name. It did not exist anywhere in the financials she had sent me. My attorney used the word concealment. She used it carefully, and she used it once. But she used it. I want to be clear about something. I am not a woman who acts from anger. Anger is expensive. It costs you precision, and it costs you the moral high ground, and in a legal or financial dispute, you need both. What I felt sitting across from my attorney was not anger. It was the particular kind of stillness that comes when something you prepared for actually arrives. I had built something into that agreement for exactly this moment. The right to call a formal review if reporting obligations were not met or if the business made significant financial decisions without a documented process. My daughter-in-law had accepted a corporate catering partnership, a significant business development, without any documented approval, without notifying me, and apparently with every intention of keeping that revenue off the books I was supposed to see. She had laughed at the ribbon cutting with my son. She had built a following online with captions about grit and late nights and doing it themselves. She had curated a story that had no room for me in it, and she had still expected the loan payments to flow on schedule like the agreement only ran one direction. I told my attorney to prepare the formal review notice. The notice arrived at their attorney's office on a Thursday. I know because my son called me on Friday morning at 7:45, a time he hadn't called me in months. His voice was different. Not the loose celebratory voice from opening day. Something tighter. Something that had been up since before sunrise. Mom, one word and I could hear everything behind it. The restaurant, the reputation, the expansion they had started quietly discussing, with a second location, all of it suddenly sitting under a question mark. I asked him how he was doing. Not to be cruel, because I genuinely wanted to know if my son was all right before I dealt with the business. He said he needed to understand what was happening. He said his wife was upset. He said they hadn't done anything wrong. They had just been focused on growing. I let him finish. Then I asked him one question. Why isn't the catering revenue in the reports you sent me? The silence on his end told me he knew. He had known. He said they thought it was separate because it operated under a different workflow. I said the agreement didn't have a separate category for workflows. It had one category, full disclosure of all revenue streams. He started to say something about how they were planning to consolidate everything at the end of the quarter, and I stopped him gently. You accepted a corporate partnership 6 weeks ago, I said. I saw the announcement online. It wasn't in any report you sent me. That's not a workflow question. Another silence. Then, she handles the business side. There it was. The sentence men say when they want distance from something their wife did that they watched happen and said nothing to stop. I told my son I loved him. I told him this was not about punishing anyone. I told him what it was actually about. The agreement we all signed gives me the right to do exactly what I'm doing. I built that in because I knew business gets complicated. This is the agreement working the way it was supposed to. He didn't sound relieved, but he didn't argue. His wife called me that same afternoon. Her voice was the composed version of her voice, the one she uses when she needs something from someone she'd rather not need anything from. She explained the catering oversight. She used the word oversight 3 times. She said she had intended to present it at the 6-month milestone meeting. I noted that no 6-month milestone meeting had been scheduled, which was itself a violation of what we'd agreed to. She said she felt like she was being treated like a suspect. I said gently but clearly that the agreement didn't require anyone to be trustworthy. It required everyone to be accountable. Those are not the same thing. She went quiet in a way that wasn't agreement. It was recalibration. The formal review happened on a Tuesday in my attorney's conference room. My son came, his wife came, their attorney came, a younger man who spent the first 10 minutes trying to establish that the violations were technical rather than substantive. My attorney let him finish. Then she opened the file and began reading the specific clauses and the specific dates on which they had not been honored. Technical violations look very different once they are read aloud in sequence. By the time we reached the catering partnership, my daughter-in-law's composure had developed small cracks at the edges, not visible to someone who didn't know her. Visible to me. Her jaw held too still. Her hands stayed flat on the table the way hands stay flat when someone is reminding themselves not to move. My son looked at the table more than he looked at anyone in the room. Their attorney tried twice to redirect toward a settlement framework, a going-forward agreement that would set new reporting standards without addressing the existing gaps. My attorney listened both times. Then she said what I had authorized her to say. We were not there to renegotiate. We were there to enforce what had already been agreed. I want to tell you what enforcement actually looked like, because I think people have the wrong picture. It was not dramatic. No one raised their voice. No one cried. What happened was precise. Under the terms of the agreement, the formal review triggered an acceleration clause. The full loan balance became callable on a shorter timeline unless the parties agreed to a remediation plan that included corrected financials, a full accounting of the catering revenue from the beginning, and the appointment of an independent bookkeeper whose reports would come directly to me, not through my daughter-in-law. Their attorney asked for 2 weeks to respond. My attorney gave him 10 days. My daughter-in-law called me the evening after that meeting. The composure was gone. Not completely, but enough. She said she felt like I'd been waiting for an excuse to take over. I listened to her say that, without interrupting. When she finished, I said one thing. I wasn't waiting for an excuse. I was waiting for what we agreed to. You decided those were the same thing. She didn't have an answer for that. Not a real one. The next 10 days were quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight in it. My son sent me 2 texts. Both of them said versions of the same thing. They were working on it. They needed this to stay private. He hoped we could get through it without it affecting the family. I noticed he said family this time without any confusion about who was included in it. On day 9, their attorney sent a proposed remediation plan. It was close to what we had asked for. There were 2 points that needed adjusting. My attorney made the adjustments. The revised plan came back within 48 hours. Signed. The independent bookkeeper started the following Monday. Her name was not known to me before my accountant recommended her. She was thorough, and she was neutral, which is exactly what that situation required. Within her first 2 weeks, she submitted a complete accounting of the catering revenue that had not appeared in the reports I'd received. It was not a small number. It was nearly $60,000 across 5 months. I didn't call my son when I received that report. I sat with it for a full day before I did anything. Because the number wasn't just money. It was a decision someone had made repeatedly to keep something from me. And my son had known. Not the full scope, maybe. But he had known the catering line existed. He had known it wasn't in my reports. And he had said nothing. When I finally called him, I didn't lead with the $60,000. I asked how the restaurant was doing. He said well. I asked how he was doing. He said tired. Then I asked him to come see me. Just him. Not a business meeting. Just him, mother, wanting to see her son. He came on a Saturday afternoon. He sat at my dining room table again, but differently this time. No laptop case. No rehearsed energy. Just a man who looked like he hadn't been sleeping enough and had been carrying something heavy for too long. We talked for almost 2 hours. I let him talk first. He talked about the pressure of the restaurant, about his wife's drive and how much he admired it, about how it felt to finally be building something and how he was terrified every single day that it would fall apart. He talked about how he knew the reporting had slipped and how he'd told himself it was temporary. He didn't mention the catering revenue directly. I waited to see if he would. He didn't. So I said it. The bookkeeper found $60,000 in catering revenue that was never reported to me. That wasn't an oversight, son. Someone made a choice. He looked at the table. Then he looked at me. His eyes had that particular exhaustion in them that comes when a person has been holding a truth at arm's length for a long time and it finally arrives in the room. I knew it was there, he said quietly. She said it was complicated to account for. I let it go. I didn't raise my voice. I have never needed volume to make a point land. You let it go, I said. And it cost you something. It didn't have to cost you. He nodded. He looked like his father for a moment, in the way that grown children sometimes remind you of the people you've lost. And I felt something move through me that wasn't anger and wasn't grief, but lived somewhere between them. I told him what I needed from him going forward, not from his wife, not from their attorney, from him. Regular communication with me directly, not about reports and numbers, just about the business, how it was going, what they were struggling with, what was working. I told him that I had not given him $280,000 because I wanted to control him. I had given it because I believed in him. And being believed in comes with the responsibility of not hiding from the person who believes in you. He said he understood. I believed that he meant it. The restaurant is doing well now. The catering partnership they tried to hide from me has become one of their strongest revenue streams. The independent bookkeeper has stayed on and the reports come every month, on time, in the right format. My son calls me more than he did in those middle months. Not every week, but enough that I don't feel like a line item in his life anymore. His wife and I are not close. I don't think we will be, not in the way I once hoped. She is a capable woman with real talent and a genuine vision, and she is also a woman who tried to make herself the center of a story that already had someone else's name on the foundation. We are civil. We are professional. At Christmas dinner, she passes me the sweet potato pie with a warmth that is mostly performance, and I accept it with the grace of a woman who doesn't need the performance to be real in order to appreciate that it exists. My son stood up at Easter this past spring and made a toast. It was not theatrical. He is not a theatrical person. He held his glass and he looked at me across the table and he said, I want to thank the person who built the ground under everything we're standing on. His wife smiled. The smile had something private in it. Something I recognized as the quiet surrender of a woman who has accepted a truth she spent a long time refusing. I raised my glass. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The thing about building something real is that it doesn't require your name on the ribbon. It requires your hand in the foundation. And foundations don't disappear just because someone tries to cut you out of the photograph. The ribbon was yellow. I will never forget that. Yellow, held between two people who thought the story began with them. The story began with me. And because I built it right, it will outlast the photographs. I've been thinking about what I would tell a woman sitting across from me right now, coffee in hand, wondering whether she made a mistake by helping someone she loved, wondering whether the structure she put in place was too much or not enough, or whether it made her the kind of mother people whisper about. I'd tell her this. The outcome you got was not an accident. It was the result of choices made by everyone involved, including you. That's not a comfortable thought, but it's a true one. When I loaned my son that money, I made a choice to do it with my eyes open. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I understood that trust and documentation are not opposites. The women in my life who got hurt giving money to family were not naive. They were generous without structure. Those are very different things. I chose structure, and that choice is the reason I'm sitting here with a relationship that survived something that breaks most families apart. My daughter-in-law made choices too. She chose to keep the catering revenue out of the reports I was owed. She chose to build a public story that had no room for the woman who made the building possible. She chose comfort over honesty, and she kept choosing it until the consequences arrived and asked her to choose again. I don't carry bitterness about that. I carry the understanding that people do what they believe they can get away with, and the only honest response is to be the kind of person they can't get away with it around. Not out of punishment, out of clarity. My son made choices too, and his were harder for me to sit with. He knew the catering line existed. He said nothing. There's a particular kind of silence a child uses when they want their mother's resources without her authority, and I recognized it because I had seen it building for months before I named it. He was not a villain. He was a man who wanted to be seen as self-made and was willing to quietly disappear his mother's contribution to get there. That's not evil. It's a specific kind of weakness, and the good news about weakness is that it can be corrected. He corrected it. The toast he gave at Easter was not theater. I know my son's voice when he means something. What I want to say to anyone watching this is not that you should go home and hire an attorney before you help your children. What I want to say is that the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to pretend that love cancels out accountability. It doesn't. Love is actually the reason accountability matters. When you let the people you love operate without consequences, you are not protecting them. You are protecting a version of them that will eventually collapse under its own entitlement. My daughter-in-law is a more grounded businesswoman today than she was the day she held that ribbon. My son is a more honest man. That didn't happen despite what I did. It happened because of it. I spent 64 years learning that the hardest things to hold on to are not money and not property. They're your word, your standards, and your sense of what you're worth. I held on to all three. And because I did, so did the people who needed me to show them how.